Many ACT therapists quietly delay teaching the process of self as context. We know it's important, but we're not always sure what it is in practice or how to make it land with clients. So, naturally, we focus on other processes first: values, diffusion, present moment. But when we kick self as process, self as context down the road, there's a cost. Clients remain enslaved to their stories rather than being able to see through them. They struggle, and progress is often slower. Over the years, I've come to think of self as context as one of the most critical processes in ACT. And so instead of waiting, I go there much quicker. And here's how I do that. Well, if you've ever found yourself thinking, I'll come back to self as context later, you're not alone. Many ACT therapists do. We hesitate because self as context sounds abstract, philosophical. Exercises like the continuous U or the chessboard metaphor can land with a polite nod, but little felt sense. Clients might smile, says, that's interesting, and go right back to arguing with their thoughts. So beneath this hesitation, the therapist, lies an opportunity. When we help clients experience self as context, not just understand it, experience it, therapy deepens. And it stops being about fixing content, it becomes about changing the relationship with the whole internal world. And so here's why self as context matters. It's the spacious awareness from which all experience is observed. It's the part of us that notices thoughts, emotions, memories, sensations, but it's not defined by any of them. And this matters because when people get entangled with their stories, they stop discriminating between contexts. They follow rigid rules learned long ago, even when those rules no longer fit or work. Take the client who learned early on that showing weakness invites shame. Decades later, that story still dictates behavior. Don't ask for help. Stay competent. Stay composed. Even in therapy, vulnerability feels like failure. And in behavioral terms, this transformation of stimulus function is happening. The old learning is generalized beyond its original context. In human terms, it's a life constrained by armor. Brené Brown talks about how we wear armor to protect ourselves from vulnerability. And it's a beautiful metaphor for fusion. In response to our self stories, such as I'm not enough, I'm weak, I'm the one who always has to cope, we adopt rules. We learn to run, fight, hide. And these patterns become layers of protection. They shield us from pain, but also importantly, from connection and vitality. In ACT, we help clients notice this armor with curiosity and kindness. We invite awareness. What's this armor protecting me from? What would it be like to soften just a little? This is the beginning of self as context work, not rejecting the story, but turning toward it with awareness and with curiosity. Self as context work can feel too abstract. The challenge is that many ACT exercises leap too far too soon. Asking a client to see themselves as the sky containing all the weather can feel poetic to us, but disorientating to someone still caught up inside the storm. Before people can step back from their stories, they first need to see the story. And that's what I often begin with when doing self as content work: naming the stories, describing where and when they show up, and what they ask the client to do. It's a developmental sequence. Name the story, observe the story operating, make room for it, and choose action guided by values. So let's go through that one by one. Step one: naming the story. Self as context begins with self as content. In session, I might say, let's slow down. When this voice says you're failing again, what name would you give that story? Naming gives the client a handle on it. It puts the statement into a pattern. This helps them to step outside the story so they can see it rather than be it. For example, a client might identify the broken story or the failing story. And once named, we can start tracking it. When does it show up? What triggers it? How does it influence what you do? And so this phase of the work isn't about dismantling the story. It's about helping the client get better at noticing it. Noticing creates the foundation for everything that follows. And so in step two, we try to see the story in action. Once a client can name the story, we can invite them to watch it unfold. So I often use language like, can we notice how this story tells you what to do, what it says, how it urges you to respond? This begins to activate the self as observer process. The client shifts from being inside the story to watching it operate. And you can even frame it as a little experiment. Let's see what happens if we just observe that story doing its thing for a minute, like watching a movie scene you've seen many times. Here, we're cultivating a flexible perspective taking approach. The client learns, I can notice the story, I can observe it, I can look at it without needing to get away from it. And this takes us to step 3, making room for the story. At this point, some clients want to say, so I'm not my story. And it might be tempting for you to try and soften that distinction. Declaring I'm not my story can sound liberating, but often carries a subtle rejection. Yes, you are. You get drawn into more overthinking, trying to push away discomfort. And so instead, I like to invite a paradox. You are your story, and you're also more than your story. We can hold both. This is where I introduce the idea of awareness as a container. Awareness doesn't fight with content, it makes room for all of it, the story, the feelings, the sensations, the silence. I might say, can we make a little space for that not enough story to sit with us here? You have to like it. You could practice letting it be here. The story speaks, the body listens, and you can be an observer of both. This gentle widening of awareness is what loosens the armor. And so that takes us to step 4, choosing from your values. Once clients observe and make room for their stories, they can begin to choose actions based on their values rather than rules. The freedom here isn't to eliminate the story, it's to act with it while it's present. I might say, if this not enough story is here and you still wanted to bring kindness into your awareness, what might that look like today? Values offer an alternative source of guidance, one rooted in meaning rather than avoidance. Okay, let's return to you, the therapist, for a moment. Think about modeling. Teaching as self Teaching self as context isn't just about what we say, it's about how we are in the room. As therapists, there's an opportunity to model perspective taking when we use I statements, when we reveal our own noticing rather than presenting fixed truths. For example, I notice I'm really wanting to rescue you from that story right now. That's my own version of armor showing up. In doing so, we model what it means to notice our internal reactions without letting them dictate our next move. This is self as context in action, alive, between two humans, you and your client. I sometimes think of this as Skinner's distinction between the speaker and the listener. The self story is the speaker. It constantly narrates, evaluates, and advises. The listener is awareness itself, the part that can hear the story and decide whether to follow or not. And when we teach clients to listen wisely, to pause and consider what they want in this context, we help them reclaim their choice. And in therapy, that might begin with you. You go first. You show your client how to notice, how to stay with uncertainty, how to hold multiple truths at once. And so we can loosen the armor. Ultimately, self as context is about being more than one thing. It's about making room for many stories without needing any of them to win. And it's about being more than your stories, which you didn't choose. When we help clients to notice their stories as voices within their awareness, we invite them to loosen their grip on the truth and open themselves to curiosity. We invite them to take off a piece of the armor, not to always expose themselves recklessly, of course, which would be following a different rule, but to breathe, take a beat, and respond when you're ready. Sometimes you can go first. You can show vulnerability and demonstrate that you won't back away or collapse in the presence of discomfort. That's how safety between people can grow, through shared courage. Self as context is not merely a technique to deliver, it's a stance to inhabit. It's a pattern of noticing with broader awareness and increasing the possibilities for choosing your next step from outside the control of the story. And maybe that's what teaching it really means, to help another human see that they can listen to their stories, thank them for their service, and still choose what comes next. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe. And if you prefer to read my articles, then you can follow me on Substack. The link is below.